The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 8th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus called to the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life?" The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Well, in the gospel reading today, Jesus finally lays it all out on the line. Everything he's been hinting at and alluding to all this time is now spelled out clearly for the disciples with brutal honesty. The Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by all the most important religious leaders and will even be killed. And Peter isn't having it. He isn't listening to all that noise. And he pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him. He rebukes Jesus. I love picturing this scene. I imagine Peter yanking Jesus aside like a mom in a department store whose kid's getting a little too squirrely. You know what I mean? By the way, what is it about department stores that just makes kids lose their minds? They can walk normally all the way up to the door, but the moment we're inside a store, my kids turn into little spider monkeys, just running and jumping and wiggling everywhere. And I know I was the exact same way. I loved hiding in the middle of those clothes racks and jumping out to scare my mom. That's why they don't have circle clothes racks anymore, by the way, because of kids like me. And I always knew when my mom had finally had enough, because she would yank on my arm and as quietly and as loudly as possible, all at the same time, she would say through her teeth, "That's enough." That's what I imagine Peter doing to Jesus in this moment. And knowing what we know now, doesn't it make you cringe a little? Doesn't it just make you feel cringy for Peter in this moment? Because you're talking to Jesus, man. The Son of God, the Messiah. How do you have the gall to speak to Jesus that way? And maybe we can chalk it up to the fact that Peter didn't fully understand who he was speaking to, but here's the thing. Peter did know. Literally, just 2 verses before this story, Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And it's Peter who, without hesitation, says, "You, Jesus, you are the Messiah." But see, that's also why Peter rebukes Jesus, because he believes he's the Messiah. And what Jesus is saying here just doesn't line up with Peter's ideas and expectations for what the Messiah will be or do. The Messiah is supposed to be the high king that reigns forever. The Messiah is supposed to set God's people free once and for all. The Messiah is supposed to be victorious and glorious and loved by all. The Messiah doesn't suffer or get rejected, and he definitely doesn't die. Jesus, this is not the way is supposed to be. You ever had things in your life that made you scream as loudly or as quietly as possible through gritted teeth, Jesus, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This isn't the way it was supposed to turn out. This is not what I had planned or what I had in mind or what I had hoped for. Life is so full of disappointments, especially lately. And those disappointments can impede our ability to listen. Did you catch that? Let me say it again. Disappointment can impede our ability to listen. Sometimes our grief or sadness or anger or doubt can get so loud in our heads or in our hearts that we can't even hear anything else. When our dreams come crashing down around us, sometimes all we can hear is the death and destruction of our greatest hopes or our deepest desires. And when little disappointments pile on to each other, one after another, it can feel soul-crushing and suffocating like 1,000 pillows muffling and silencing everything else. Sometimes disappointment can impede our ability to listen to God. That's what happens to Peter. All Peter could hear was suffering and rejection and death, that he completely missed what Jesus said next. Jesus said the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. And, listen, after 3 days, rise again. Rise victorious, rise in glory. But Peter didn't hear any of that. And after he rebukes Jesus, Jesus rebukes him and says, "You've got your mind set on human things." And then he says something even more confusing. He says, "And if you want to be my followers, then you got to be willing to actually follow me on this road full of dashed hopes and disappointments. You got to pick up your own cross as we journey together, and everything you have, everything you love, your whole life must become a sacrifice for my sake and for the sake of the gospel. Because the second you love something more than you love me, it becomes an idol, and your life belongs to it. For what will it profit you to gain the whole world, but to forfeit your life? And what can you give in return for your life?" Listen, I know. After the year we've all had, after it feels like so much has been taken away already, it's hard to hear Jesus asking, "What would you be willing to give up for me?" I mean, when Jesus asks, "Is the whole world really worth your whole life?" I just keep thinking, I'm not asking for the whole world, Jesus. I just want to see my family and friends again. I just want to worship with my church again. I just want to hold someone's hand and hug someone. I want to smile at a stranger and see their smile back. I just want some sense of normalcy again. The way it used to be, the way it should be. But the truth is, most of those things are more about me than they are about Jesus. Or at least I've made them that way. So many things have become idols in my life. have become more important to me than Jesus is. Even and especially in the church. When it comes to worship, some of the things I care most about have become more important than the things they represent. I know the same is true for some of you. And please hear me, that doesn't mean that the altar or the flowers or my robes don't have meaning. It just means that none of those things have to exist for the things they represent to still be true. It means that what happens on top of the altar is far more important than the altar itself. Or that the beauty we see and embody in the flowers is more important than any carnation or lily or rose. That the common baptism of all the saints here and there, now and always, is more important than the garments that represent them. Because when we care about the thing more than the thing it represents, we've made it into an idol. And Jesus is calling again and again for us to listen. Sometimes the way things used to be aren't always how they should be after all. Because God is never calling us to the past, but God is always calling us into something more, something better. God is always calling us into a future that God has prepared for us, a future God has prepared us for. But the only way we'll ever know is if we listen for God. And God will give us a space to grieve for what was or for what could have been. God will acknowledge and sit with us in our disappointment and dashed dreams. God will let us yell or scream through gritted teeth, but then God will call us again and again to listen. I want to invite you into a moment of listening now. What are the things God may be calling you to sacrifice for the sake of the gospel? What disappointments need to be acknowledged until they're quieted enough for you to hear the voice of Jesus? What God-prepared future are you being called into? And how are you being prepared for it now? And finally, how will you take time and make space to keep listening for God this week and throughout this Lenten season? Amen. If you've been blessed by the ministry of Zion Lutheran Church and feel moved to support and participate in its mission, to welcome all people, grow as followers of Jesus, and serve all creation, then I invite you now to go to our website, zionlima.org, and click on the Give Online tab where you can set up a one-time or recurring gift. This ministry and so many others would not be possible without your generosity. And we're counting on you now more than ever. However you choose to support or participate in our mission, I thank you.